Okay, the next one I'm going to go to is page 2 of 3. Thank you. Okay, on page 2 of 3, it actually started the page before where she's asking Todd about the number of farms that he's knocked out or changed use of or did some other 490 changes that he made. And but I'm not going to be bothered with it because I don't think his records are that accurate anyway. But what I do have is to go through is the BAA issued a report in May of 2022 that these things that she's talking about in her email, or yeah, in her memo, are the same things we talked about in May of last year that we were criticized for by the administration in terms of we were too harsh, we shouldn't be saying this stuff, and so on. So to continue on with page 2, she refers to an email, or excuse me, a telephone conversation she had with Joan Nichols. This would be page 28 in us, and it's Bates number 1003. And on this particular email, this is actually an email now from the town manager to Mario Capola in January of this year. And she's talking about a phone call she had with Joan Nichols of the Farm Bureau back on February 16th, a year earlier, that she had made notes from. And some of the notes that are worth looking at are, she does talk about Joan Nichols saying that it appears that Todd Helms had terminated classifications of 490 parcels that were granted by previous assessors, that they're working farms, and that Todd Helms decided to terminate on his own, and that some of these concerned woodlands, because he didn't understand that woodlands are part of the farm units as defined in the statutes. This is Ellen's notes, by the way, so she's commenting that Joan also believes that it's a direct violation of 2 state laws, which she interprets as meaning that previous classifications hold with the owners unless there is a change of title or change of use, which I believe is what Attorney Davitsky explained to us earlier, which we all know anyway. And then that neither has occurred in their status as 490 should not have been changed or terminated. She then talked about how Joan said that the declaration of policy under the 490 legislation is to provide a tax benefit and does not force conversions due to assessments. Then she says, Joan stated, Todd has the 2020 Connecticut Farm Bureau Guide to PA490 in his office. She commented that he wreaked havoc in Bloomfield 2 or 3 years ago. He ignored court cases. In the case of wetlands, farmers are trying to be good stewards and not fill wetlands. She then talked about some comments made by Kelleher and easy picking. So at this stage, I'm going to show you I'm going to tell you what she said first, and then show you what Kelleher really said. By the way, anybody we're doing this on, we have permission from them to actually bring their names up and say it, because even though it's public information, again, we're not going to invade anybody's privacy or make them feel uncomfortable. So everybody we're talking about, we've already discussed this with them and we have their consent. So now, if I can have the Kelleher, this would be, I think, 8. It's this one.
It's card 10. It's up.
It's up. It's
Oh,
on the
it's-
bottom. Why
Oh.
I'm not finding it.
9 and 10.
9 and 10 are there.
9 is top, 10 is bottom.
Where's,
Second one.
but where's Kelleher's? His is 880. That's the one I want. Thank you.
12A.
Okay, thank you. So anyway, this is easy picking. And it is easy picking. So Brian Kelleher, back in February of 2022, wrote to Ellen, and he gave a copy to Matt Despard and Michael Ludwig. And he talked about a meeting that he had on the 16th of February with the town manager and the assessor. So when the assessor summarizes Kelleher as individual parcels in process for estate planning purposes, there's nothing about contiguous or non-contiguous farmland. That's it. That's the only mention she makes of this. But here's what really Kelleher told her. So Kelleher said that they began to discuss and review the change of assessments that Helms had made, and Helms thought that the difference was because of building values. And then when he looked at the cards, he said, well, there's no change there, and so it's not building. The assessor then stated that Brian Kelleher had 11 acres of woodland and 2.7 acres of swamp, edge, and brushland. The only problem is Kelleher doesn't have that on his farm. And then Todd had changed his soil to tillable C, which makes it more expensive for the farmer, not less expensive. At that point, Todd pointed to a map where there's some tilled fields and indicated that his parcel stopped there. Mr. Kelleher then went and moved the map so he could point to the actual parcel boundaries and showed him the parcel does indeed contain woods and woodlands. The assessor stated, well, he's been using Google to see the latest land uses, and that Google doesn't include property boundaries. So then Brian Kelleher pointed out to the assessor that this property review made a significant revaluation, sent this revaluation out in a curt one-paragraph letter without explanation, and all of it is based on inaccurate reading of the town's map property lines. The assessor then stated his conviction that wooded parcels needed to have significant farm activity taking place within the parcel in order to be included in the farm unit. The statute clearly allows wooded parcels to be included in the farm unit. They don't have to be tilled. The assessor then goes down to the next one and he says, well, the assessor has the right to fix mistakes that previously occurred in 490 designation of parcels. This right is not indicated in the state statute, which clearly states the owner can only remove a parcel from 490 designation when there is a change of use or a change of ownership. Neither of those has taken place in the two wooded parcels being reviewed. And again, Attorney Dubinsky validated that again tonight. We've heard that so many times. It's in the Connecticut Farm Bureau book from 490 and so on. So Brian again says, listen, as a resident of Enfield, I believe the last two paragraphs indicate a lack of familiarity on the assessor's part of Connecticut PA490, a statute that's vital in the performance of the assessor's responsibilities. And then he ends up saying that over the course of these decades, the local government has been extremely supportive and helpful. He actually mentioned Ginny Higley as being helpful 5 or 6 years earlier when they did some estate planning transfer from the mother to an LLC. And then he goes on to say that he certainly hopes that this email helps illustrate so our town can turn it around and get back to the values and quality our residents appreciate in their town. So he's sending this constructive criticism to her. He didn't go broadcast it on TV. He didn't call Paul Feinberg show yet. And so he's trying to make a situation better by letting the manager know what's going on. And again, her comment in her recollection of stuff was basically that they're individual parcels in the process of estate planning purposes. So then the next thing she talks about in this memo is the Agriculture Commission. And what she talks about in the Agriculture Commission is she mentions or states that they hosted Joan and the Farm Bureau for a meeting. That's the one also Attorney Dubinsky, I believe, was at. And her characterization of it is as follows. That was on March 3rd, 2022, and over 150 people attended. And then Joan went over the roles and responsibilities. Ellen says she was there to bear witness and it was a, quote, pitchforks and torches, unquote, type of event, with many farmers coming to the microphone and castigating Todd. She then goes on to finish that, basically saying that she attributes this problem to a transition from the former assessor to the new assessor, and things were handled differently in the past, and it's a little different now. So with the Agriculture Commission, I want to show you what they really said. So there's two more, the ag ones.
11 and 12.
Thank you, Laurie. Okay. So here's what happened with the Agriculture Commission. The Agriculture Commission now, let's see, oh, here we go. So the Agriculture Commission on February 8th of 2022, they reported concerns on PA490 properties to the town manager and to the Enfield Town Council. So all the council members got it and the town manager. And the first paragraph talks about how their goal or their mission is to educate and communicate on agricultural issues between the farmers and municipal officials so that they can reduce conflict, give advisory services, and foster a climate supporting economic viability of agriculture in the community. They then identify, right here, 4 major issues that have come up. And the issues they identify are qualifying properties that were being entirely removed from 490 program. Second one is land classifications or adjustments are being made without sufficient or advance notice to the property owners. Third is removal of woodland and wasteland from the farmland area classifications. And finally, that there were allegations that town employees were present on private property without notice or announcement, basically assuming trespasser status. That's my words on that, my editorial. So on July 11th of 2022, or excuse me, January 11th, 2022, the supervisor of assessment, Todd, was invited as a special guest to a regular meeting, and it was during their meeting that he then made other statements about removing other people from 490 and so on. So based upon what's going on with the 490, at that point, the Agriculture Commission said that when you take away 18 parcels classified as woodlands, 13 parcels as pasture, 12 parcels as tillable sea, and 10 parcels as forest, that's over 1,400 acres that he removed summarily without what appears to be any good cause. So if farms were removed or had qualifying acreage, then it appears to be an improper and erroneous interpretation. So to ensure proper implementation and compliance with 490 and reconcile the claims of affected farmers, they recommended he immediately suspend any further changes to 490, and they reverse them, putting them back where they were before he started it, that any further changes that he proposes that be done after consultation with outside experts, of which we know he didn't talk to anyone from the letter I sent him, including, though, the Department of Agriculture and the Connecticut Farm Bureau Association. So that's really what the Agriculture Commission with Karen LaPlante and others who have served so honorably here for many years, Mike Dynia and so on, that's what they recommended in a 2-page memo to the town manager. So hold on one second. Okay, so now back to Todd Helms' interview with Matt. Remember I read you some pages before. I'm going to read you a couple more now. This is Enfield 3588, Bates number. It's our page 20 through 24. I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but parts. So this is with Mr. Coppola now. So Coppola asks Todd, is it legally permissible for an assessor to enter private property for the purpose of an assessment without first obtaining permission from the property owner? Todd Helms, it is. 1255 gives the assessor the right to visit any property for a valid reason. My practice is to always knock on the door. If it's an occupied building, if there's an actual house on the property, vacant property if it's vacant, the assessor does have the right to walk on the property for a valid reason. So apparently, the civil criminal trespass and U.S. Constitution rights are suspended in Enfield for the tax assessor. Then you go to the next page. This is a different attorney now asking Todd Helms. Do you look at soil maps that are available online, or do you have a program with soil mapping? Well, I don't look at soil maps. I'm not a soil scientist. But what I looked at was the farmer, the same owner, has 2 properties on both sides of it. He claimed that those were tillable B, so that to the extent of my research, if both sides of it are the same thing, how could the middle be any different? It's basically same type of soil and terrain going across it. Okay, and when you're dealing with PA490 properties, have you ever consulted with the Department of Agriculture or reached out to the Department of Agriculture for advisory opinion? No. I gotta repeat that one. Okay, and when you're dealing with PA490 properties, have you ever consulted with the Department of Agriculture or reached out to the Department of Agriculture for advisory opinion? Answer, no. These answers are being given about a year after the Agriculture Commission has made its recommendations about talking to some of these people before you make these decisions. So its answer is no. Then it's, are you aware of any property owners who have ever done that when there is a dispute? Okay. Well, have you found in the past advisory opinions to be helpful? If the Department of Agriculture issues an advisory opinion, then do you typically acknowledge and adhere to the recommendation of the Department of Agriculture? I've never actually seen a recommendation from the Agriculture Department as far as classifications go or values. I've seen some broad recommendations. Then he goes on and talks about, Joan Nichols, not to name names, but she's been the go-to person at that department. Now he's talking about the Agriculture Department. And it's been described, just thinking about how I actually want to say this, it's been described that she will take a Walmart parking lot and claim it as farmland because there's a farm market on it. So I mean, they may have a different goal than what the towns and necessarily, the assessors do, but and role. It is the assessor's decision to classify, farmland, not anybody else's decision, not the Ag Department, not the State Department. It's each individual assessor's job to do that. So then Matt says, well, what you're referring to Joan Nichols, we interviewed Joan as part of this process. It's my understanding she's with the Connecticut Farm Bureau. So does that change your response at all with regard to reaching out to the Department of Agriculture, or do you find that, they often refer you to the Farm Bureau? I just never found a reason to reach out for them. And then the next page talks about 490 as a use statute. Now, the people that aren't farmers probably going to be farmers by the time you're done attending this one, whatever else we have. You're going to know all the language. Okay, so Matt says, well, clearly 490 is a use statute. You can't, the intent is clear. You don't look at the highest and best use. You can't take farmland and, assess it as a residential subdivision or commercial lot, correct? Correct. So then, Todd Helms then talks about, well, I would say the highest classification what the property is, then he goes on wandering a little, and then he comes back and says, so you're going to classify it once as what it should be, the highest and best farm use that it can be, and it stays there. It doesn't change year after year unless something catastrophic happens. So he basically now, when you're not supposed to take highest and best use, he now is taking highest and best farm use. Is there any such thing, Laura?
No.
And you're an appraiser.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so then, to continue on, have you ever consulted with soil scientists? The answer to that, I gotta start this way, excuse me. Okay, and in your experience, have you found that farm owners are typically honest and forthcoming about the classification of their property? Then he goes on and says, have you ever consulted with soil scientists? Todd Helms answers by saying, well, the answer to the last part is no, I never consulted with soil scientists. I don't review 490 all that often. And then he goes talking about other stuff, but he never answers the first part about, does he think farm owners are typically honest? So he never answered that part of the question, but when he was at the BAA meeting in March, I think it was this past year, he did tell us that taxpayers lie. We then said, and I just remember me saying it, is that, well, actually, we found taxpayers to be candid, forthright, and honest, and we start off treating everybody that way unless it's proven differently. But I was taken back by an attitude of taxpayers lie. So that takes care of the this part of page 2. Excuse me.